All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Troy Swanson. I'm the Library Department Chair. I want to thank all of you for attending. This is a special event that's part of our One Book, One College series. This year, we're looking at the book All We Can Save, which is a collection of essays that covers a whole lot of topics. It's really focused on sustainable living and combating climate change. But one of the interesting things that comes out of that book is a way that we think about knowledge, and specifically thinking about spirituality and traditional forms of knowledge in different ways that we can know the world and how that can help us live more sustainably with each other and with the world around us. And so in touching on this theme, we wanted to hold an event that was kind of unique, I think, talking about, again, the different ways of knowledge and connecting. And we are so excited to have Dawn Roble, who's one of our faculty members in geography, joining us today and talking to us about shamanism and how this spiritual line of thinking and knowing the world could be a way to help us achieve some of these maybe sustainability goals. Not to put too much pressure on you there, Dawn. But I do want to thank our audience members for coming, and especially Dawn, I want to thank you for the time in preparing this event and encouraging students to come and being part of our programming and always being so supportive of our library programs. So thank you, Dawn. For our audience members, if you're in the audience, you're not able to unmute yourselves and talk. So to ask us questions, please use the chat and the Q&A option that's there. We'll take questions at the end of the presentation once we get through, and then we'll have some time to explore a little bit more. So with that, I will mute myself and turn it over to Dawn. So thanks again, Dawn. Don't forget to share your screen.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. And I'm going to be talking about shamanism for local and global change. And as you know, Troy was mentioning things. One of the things I noticed this morning is that over the years, I have substantially reduced the amount of waste that my household produces. So this morning was our garbage pickup day, was not a recycling day, but we had like half of a kitchen can of garbage for an entire week for 2 adults and 3 pets. So I've gone from a full garbage can or more down to that little, and then every 2 weeks we have about a half a can of recycling, and that's actually grown because of COVID, because more things are being delivered. We're not allowed to use reusable bags, but one of my goals over the years has been to cut my personal footprint. Today I'm going to talk about my activity with shamanism, and there are many ways to look at shamanism. Typically, I've been talking about this in church settings for like the last 10 years because it is a spiritual practice. Today, I'm going to talk about it from a more academic standpoint because we can look at it academically. I'm a geographer by both education and inclination, and from a geographic standpoint, shamanism is found on every inhabited continent. Also, from the standpoint of a cultural geographer, I might view it as an ethnic religion rather than a universal religion, such as Christianity or Islam. It fits the characteristics of an ethnic religion because for groups in specific areas of the earth, the practice is tied to local places in nature and to recognition of the seasonal changes that take place, astronomical events, planting and harvest, rather than to events in the life of a founder. Community members for those localized places are born into the practice of shamanism, although the level of participation may vary from one community member to another, just as in any other religion. I was not born into one of those groups, and as an individual practitioner, I view shamanism as a spiritual practice. It's an extension of my personal religious practice, blending with prayer, meditation, and other practices as a method for assessing divine guidance. So among my friends and mentors are a Jewish shamanic practitioner from a family where rabbis and shamans alternated generations for hundreds of years, a Franciscan nun, a Sufi mystic, an immigrant from Zimbabwe, and plenty of us who can be called Native American only because we were born in the United States of America. But returning to that academic lens, shamanism can be considered the oldest spiritual practice on Earth. Evidence of the practice dates back 40,000 years. So a common feature across the Earth, in the way shamanism works, is that shamanic practice treats the Earth as a living, conscious entity, as well as everything on the Earth. So it's very inclusive. This is one of my favorite prayers, and that everything that is alive and has a place on the circle is one of the fundamental beliefs in shamanism. So plants have a spirit, rocks have a spirit, the water has a spirit. The belief that everything has spirit leads to an intentional effort to develop an intimate and lasting relationship with personal helping spirits. Those personal spirits can include angels, your ancestors, power animals, and spiritual teachers. Those connections are used to bring healing, knowledge, and practical wisdom to the person in his or her community. So if we look at the word shaman, that comes from a Siberian tribal word, saman, and it is a person who is able to, in an altered state, leave his or her body and travel to other realms to interact with spirits. In the Western world, this out-of-body experience is called the shamanic journey, and the altered state of consciousness is called non-ordinary reality. The extreme examples of this travel can be probably best illustrated by the Australian Aborigine dream time. So in dream time, shamans can and do travel great distances in time and space. They often use bodies of water. So they'll go into, perhaps go in at one water hole or spring and come up at another one hundreds of miles away. Since the title shaman is conferred by the community, in the West, we refer to ourselves as shamanic practitioners. So we follow the spiritual practices, but we're not necessarily a shaman. And the journey is the way we do this. So typically, rhythmic sound, such as drumming or chanting, is used to induce a trance state that we otherwise experience only in dreaming or myth. While some cultures do use psychedelic or psychotropic plants to reach that state, sonic or auditory driving is a much more common means to reach a state in which we're in theta mode, which is a deep sleep or meditation mode. And in drumming, that's a steady rhythm of 205 to 220 beats per minute. And that works perfectly to allow you to change your consciousness, and with knowledge of shamanism, to be able to make flights or journeys to spirit worlds. While you're in that trance, practitioners are able to receive guidance, access information, experience healings at many levels, facilitate healing for other people, places, and things, including the earth. And we work with friendly spirit companions and guides who teach through story and metaphor. And a lot of it is story and metaphor. And if you look at medicine, increasingly there's a body of medicine for working with Indigenous people in medical settings that works with that idea of metaphor and story. So the goal is to integrate those visions into our everyday life. And sometimes that transferring something from non-ordinary to ordinary reality can be a bit challenging. So in terms of cosmology, just so you're familiar, as I use these words later on, the middle world is where we live. In shamanic practice, there's an upper world and a lower or underworld as well. In the US, we tend not to use the term underworld because that has connotations to illegal activities, but that's commonly used in Europe and a lot of other places. Both of the upper and lower worlds consist of a lot of layers that are mappable. And the Foundation for Shamanic Study has a collection of 5,000 maps of those worlds as part of their Celestia and Netheria studies. So there are things that are actually mapped. Often there are, even cross-culturally, there are lots of similarities in the maps between cultures. The anthropologist, Michael Harner, was one of the primary people responsible for bringing shamanic practices to the Western world. Here in the Americas, indigenous groups lost many of their traditions due to the influence of universal religions, scientific rationalism, and more recently, communism. For example, if we look at Asia, Europe and Asia, the Tuva and Siberia were forbidden to even have a drum under communism. It was a punishable offense. So Dr. Harner began to catalog and teach a group of core shamanic practices that were common across the shamanic cultures he studied. So what he was looking for was a core. He didn't want to co-opt any one culture, but he looked for things that happened in multiple cultures in terms of principles and practice. So foundation students, and I'm one of them, foundation students in the US and throughout the world discovered that their ability to practice shamanic techniques developed quickly and easily. And it felt like we were remembering something that we already knew. It's a simple, timeless, and universal practice. Again, it's been found on all of the inhabited continents. So my introduction to the shamanic journey came as part of my training as an animal communicator. That's the other half of my life outside, or a big piece of my life outside of the academic environment. I am clairaudient with animals, which means I can hear them as if they were speaking to me in human voices. And that's long been something associated with shamans or shamanic practitioners. As I worked to improve my abilities to communicate, I was taught the process of the shamanic journey as a way to achieve a connection with an animal that might not be willing to communicate in the middle world. I work with a lot of rescue animals, and a lot of them, if they've had trauma, they're not very trusting of humans. Sometimes they have to connect with you through story, and that's much easier to do in a lower world environment with another animal acting as a mediator, for example. So when I learned this, it felt like something I was remembering, and I began to explore the practice, beginning with a basic course from the foundation. And over the last 20 years, I've studied and apprenticed with a number of teachers with a variety of backgrounds, training, and experience. And to tie this in more to the one book, one college, because we're talking about how this might be another approach to look at climate change, one of the most amazing things I ever experienced was being able to change the pH of water. That was one of my early personal experiences in healing the earth. So I went through a 2-year training program called Medicine for the Earth, and I learned about the power of community to bring about change. Each person in my group was asked to bring a sample of water from a source near our home. I brought murky water from the little creek running adjacent to my property. We pH tested every sample of water, and 2 different people tested each sample and provided notes on color, sediment, content, clarity, and so on. The water samples were placed in the middle of the group, and we all journeyed to ask for healing for our water sources. At the end of the session, every sample was again tested by 2 people, and every sample had moved closer to a neutral pH, even if it had not achieved neutral, and all of the samples became clear. Even a really murky green one with a bunch of thready things in it was completely clear at the end of the session. So that was my first, one of my early, I can't say it's my first, but one of my very early experiences with working with this on the earth. And this particular, we took those water samples that had been healed, and we lovingly put them back into the body of water they came from to help heal it. and we were a really small group of 10. This same work has been done by large groups, mostly in Asia, to heal ponds and lakes, to heal much larger bodies of water. And so I just think about the powerful healing and change that can be brought about by large numbers of people working together in community to try to do some healing. So shamanic practitioners look for teachings in all areas of our lives. These can come in the form of a phrase in a book, cloud formation, an omen observed, a conversation with a stranger. Shamanic divination, asking the fully compassionate spirits for answers to questions, is particularly helpful in providing inspired and workable ways to address complex issues like climate change in ordinary reality. So I love this phrase, think globally, act locally. And more recently, one of the newer programs added by the Foundation for Shamanic Studies is one on shamanism for inspired global and local change. And here, this does not mean you don't have to do the work, because it begins by identifying a global or local issue. And if it is a global issue, one of the things is that you look for and define is one or more local expressions of that issue. And climate change is a big issue, and it's hard to tackle that as a giant issue, but much easier to tackle if you research and define one local expression of that. Then you apply either journeying or shamanic divination methods, or both, to the problem-solving process. You use shamanic divination to gain further insights into the real-world issue. You know, you might even be asking something open-ended, like, what should I learn about it? What should I know about this at this time? We do this from a standpoint of ethics and permission. Can I do this? Should I do this? May I do this? Sometimes you're not given permission to work on something. We then consider spirit-inspired community action and explore ways to ethically invoke the power of the compassionate spirits for work on that particular local issue. So I want to give this is an animal-related issue. The two issues I work on most often are water issues. I started out my professional career working in the water division of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. Water has always been really important for me. The other thing I work with, as you can imagine, are animals. So I mentioned that inspiring experience of changing the pH of water. Now I'd like to discuss how I used this approach with an animal rescue I worked with. First, you look for permissions, and I, of course, had permission to work because I was invited in to help as they prepared for an open house. They were over capacity and really struggling and trying to place a lot of animals. So I had permission from the group. The permission from the animals I obtained as I worked with each one. In advance of the open house, I was scheduled to communicate with some of the animals, and I used that process to figure out what to do. So here, my process was to journey about how to best help the animals at that time, what was in their highest and best good. So during the journey, I was told that a dog would step forward to help and would provide the approach I needed. And it turned out that that was the case. The first dog I talked to provided exactly that. He told me that I needed to ask each animal what job the animal was looking for in a household. What responsibilities was each willing to take on? And so that was the approach I took when I worked with each animal that was being presented for the adoption event. The first dog wanted to be advertised as a personal trainer and exercise buddy. Another wanted to work as a caretaker for a child. Another was older and wanted to be a companion to another older animal, perhaps one who had recently lost a companion. That animal felt that she could do a really good job of being compassionate and supportive. And so I applied that, the solution I was given. And then the community action piece was that I had to get the rescue volunteers on board with a different approach than they usually use. Because normally they'd be looking at the family coming in and were there other pets and was the animal dog or cat friendly, those kinds of things. And here we were doing something really different. Luckily, they were willing to try anything that might help. And so they were on board. They created really lovely signs for each animal with the information on the job they were looking for. And the event resulted in a lot of great placements. I want to point out here that you still have to take action. Even if we're using this method to discover a new way to work or to get some direction on our personal role and how we might help, you still have to do the work. And so we had to change how we did things. And in this case, we had to change how we presented the animals to potential adopters. We had to create the signs and alter our verbal descriptions to sell the animals based on the jobs they wanted to perform for their people. We acted like human resources headhunters. And that was a really different approach for this particular group of rescue volunteers. Then afterward, we evaluated the results. Within the first year, none of those animals were returned. They all had really good placements, and it ended up being a unique way to look at how to do a rescue event, to do a big event. In bringing this back to the specific issue of climate change, another example of working individually in community happened last fall. I participated in the European 24 Hours of Shamanism for Climate Change. This is an annual fall event in Europe. It does run for 24 hours straight with no break, and it is normally held in person, usually in Germany. Due to the pandemic, it was in Zoom and primarily offered in English. And those two factors allowed my participation with practitioners in Europe and beyond. So every hour for 24 hours with no break, someone presented shamanic work around the topic of climate change. While I did not attend all 24 sessions, I did attend a lot of them. Each was different. Somewhere in that 24 hours, I hope that everyone found information that spoke to them. 1 hour, a videographer presented a documentary on how 3 indigenous shamans were working on the issue of climate change in 3 very different places and climates. Mongolia, the rainforest in Africa, and the Amazon rainforest. Some of the issues are similar, like the encroachment of mining and plantations and things, but the climates are different, the cultures are different. And so it was interesting to see how those people were approaching it in their areas and also the challenges that they faced. Another hour, we drummed for an hour to heal the earth and ourselves. Several times we journeyed for personal tasks with respect to climate change or for solutions to specific climate issues. Another person connected us with nature through art. Everyone attending had the opportunity to journey, as well as the opportunity to discuss what we discovered in small groups. We worked on a global issue, but always from the perspective of what we could ethically do in our own lives and in our own communities. So a couple of examples. I asked questions and looked for creative solutions for engaging my students on the topic of climate change. One of the responses I received was to stress the cumulative impact of many small changes, and the change can happen from the bottom up. You don't have to wait for the government to make a change and legislate it. You as individuals or communities can begin to change and to make a difference. So one thing I found as a result of that, because of some pointers I was given, was a calculator And we used it in class and we calculated that if everyone who worked and studied at Moraine switched out one hot meal for one cold meal every week for a year, we could save enough electricity to power an average 3-bedroom US home for that entire year, just by switching one hot meal for a cold one. I also explored how to handle the overwhelm I feel when I look at global water issues, because for me, they tend to be overwhelming. And that was to start with my own water use, and also just to keep informing my students about water issues. And I know a couple of them are on this program, and they know that I often talk about the water issues. So another group I belong to is the Society for Shamanic Practitioners, and they host a group called Shamanism Without Borders. It's a lot like Doctors Without Borders. So the work on Earth Day this year is going to be about animals, and we're going to be tending to the world's animals on April 22nd, working with them according to the element in or on which they live, air, land, or water. Shamanism Without Borders is a global response network of shamanic practitioners who tend to traumatic events around the world. So they do this through the shamanic journey to energetically tend to natural disasters, acts of terrorism, war, pollution, and anything else that causes disruption and suffering to humanity, to the human, to the animal and plant life on the earth, and to the earth's delicate biosystem. So in doing this, the goal is to alleviate suffering and restore balance and harmony worldwide. So they've worked on wildfires, they worked on Ukraine, they've been working on Ukraine and Russia, they've worked on the aftermath of other natural disasters, on border disputes, pollution, all kinds of things. Anyone who would like to lend their care and support is welcome to join these tendings, either by participating in the group meeting or by tuning in on their own at that particular time and topic to work in whatever way is comfortable for them. So each tending is done from a place of neutrality so that they're open to whatever information is available to the individuals, rather than assuming they know intellectually what a situation needs. So the journey is used to figure out what they're going to do, and then they do the work. Each tending also emphasizes the practice of asking for permission to ensure that the particular issue is something that is available to us to tend to. So an example from my own background is I was asked to work on animals, to work on a particular group of animals after an explosion that had injured many of them. And, you know, there are some permissions involved. So you can do healing of the land that was impacted. I could do some general healing, but I didn't necessarily have permission to work on each of those animals. So you work with what you can, and permission was given to work on the land and their environment rather than on the animals. So permission and intention are very important in shamanic practice. And here I want to talk about the power of intention. The practice of shamanism just places a great deal of emphasis on intention. You attempt to journey with a particular intention in mind. When I'm not sure how to phrase things, I'll use phrases like, for the highest and best good at this time. I might use the process and ask an open-ended question like, what is important for me to share, or what is important for you to share with me at this time when I'm working with a compassionate spirit? And I want to give you an example of how you might look at this with your own health. So how many of us have suspected we have a health problem, and while waiting for our doctor appointment, we keep telling ourselves, don't let the doctor find anything wrong. So the doctor doesn't, and our issue isn't solved. How different might it be if instead you said or intended, please let the doctor find everything she needs to find and have the skill and technology to fix the things she finds. It might seem like a subtle shift, but that shift from don't find anything to find it and fix it is a big one when it comes to health concerns. And we can look at that just kind of in the framework as well of looking at climate issues and all of the components of things that go into that. So shamans and other spiritual teachers have demonstrated and shared for centuries that everything is connected in the web of life. We're learning now that plants talk to each other, that trees share nutrients through their root systems with other trees, lots of things we never suspected. So there's probably a lot more for us to learn in science that spirituality has already figured out. So our words and intentions are potent forces for good and evil. Quantum physics is now beginning to prove what we've known for so many centuries, that our inner thoughts and feelings are a powerful force that shape and mold our lives. Some of my favorite works on the power of or subject of intention are books by Lynn McTaggart, including The Field and The Intention Experiment, Using Your Thoughts to Change Your Life and the World. So the intention experiment, or that practice, can be done completely outside of shamanic practice or can be done with it. The intention experiment takes us on a journey to discover what exactly is meant by intention and how can we produce results we'll most appreciate. While a seasoned meditator can demonstrate remarkable control over their physical processes, and they can even remotely influence others, McTaggart describes how anyone can learn to achieve noticeable results. She states that the key to achieving an effective state of intentionality lies in powering up, reaching a state of peak intensity, developing mindfulness, merging with what is to be influenced, being compassionate, and specifically stating an intention. All parts of most shamanic practices. When we follow these instructions, after reading her thorough overview of the relevant research, we can find it a lot easier to believe that it may be possible for us to send our intentions to far off places and times, such as the programs with Shamanism Without Borders do. And so I attend with 2 different groups on a regular basis, and I am the only shamanic practitioner in those 2 groups. So it's there, you can do it in combination, but you can do it without the shamanic piece as well. One group works on traumatic events around the world, very similar to Shamanism Without Borders. The second group works primarily on personal and family issues. The practice does work. I've even written intentions that are used by my animal clients to help lost pets find their way home with really good results. So the way that we do it in the groups is we have a warm-up intention, and that's to bring in energy to the group to help us settle into a more meditative state. Then whatever intentions are on the list for that day, we hold each one for 5 to 7 minutes. We'll hold a gratitude form for 2 to 3 minutes. And then at the end of all of them, we'll do a closing intention. And the intentions will say things like immediately, completely, and permanently. And we'll ask for some very specific changes. So if someone wants to change the values in, say, blood test or cancer markers, we'll ask for a very specific percentage or number change in those in the intention. In the intentions to bring animals home, I ask that they feel the love that's waiting for them at home. And one of the reasons for that is I want people to shift, so it's not, I'm going to kill that dog when he gets home for running away. You want the shift to be, I love them so much, I'm really worried about them. I want them to feel the love and come back to that love. So, there's a lot that works with intention. And gratitude is really important and always a piece of that. A lot of times when I'm at events, I remind people of that and give out gratitude stones. And those are just little stones you carry in your purse or pocket. And every time you touch them, you think of something you're grateful for, because the more things you're grateful for, the more things want to come to you. It's just, part of the practice. So now that you've listened to a lot of lecture, I want to talk about two practices that you can do. They're a couple of my favorites, and you don't have to do these. They don't require a shamanic journey, although I use them with the shamanic journey. And they're just some very interesting ways to get you out of your head and thinking about something in a different way. And Troy, as a librarian, will probably like the first one, the Chicago dog. And I never had a name for this until I read Evelyn Rizdick's book, Shamanic Creativity. And she made the comparison that in New York, when you get a hot dog, you get a hot dog on a bun with sauerkraut and mustard, and that's it. But if you get a hot dog in Chicago, and this is not a good Chicago hot dog because it has ketchup, but in Chicago, if you get a hot dog, you get yellow mustard, chopped onions, chopped white onions, bright green pickle relish, a dill pickle spear, tomatoes in some form, sport peppers, and celery salt. So you're eating a tube steak with a side salad. And so much like our hot dogs in Chicago are overstuffed with accessories, this process overstuffs your brain to help you think creatively. So the first thing you do is you're going to gather your materials. You're going to read bits of, you want to allow a couple of hours for this when you're working on a sticky project or looking for a creative solution to something. So you want to allow a couple of hours. You're going to read bits of several books and web articles on different topics you've saved. And I know librarians are always helpful if you need some help finding things, but not on the same topic, but on multiple different topics. Then listen to snippets of several radio programs or podcasts, also on different topics. I'm not talking about listening to the whole thing. I'm talking about listening to pieces of several. Then you go out and let the subconscious mind ruminate while you're ambling around. So you do need a safe place that you can walk in a kind of mindless ambling way for a while after this practice. When you get back, you take out your notebook and you just start writing or doodling and you see what's bubbled to the surface. And it's a really good way to shake up your thinking and get some creative solutions to things. The second practice, which I hated when I was forced to do it the first time, but is now one of my favorites, is called rock grinding. And that's literally what it is. So you find a large rock and a small rock you can hold in your hand in a place where you're not going to be disturbed. And you literally sit and grind the large rock with the small rock for an extended period of time, emptying your mind. I have never been a person who could sit and just breathe for 3 hours, but I found I could sit and grind a rock for 3 hours. It clears your mind. And then at the end of the time, you grab a notebook or a sketch pad and you start writing or doodling whatever comes to mind. And it's a great technique for clearing all of the chatter and the monkey mind, and for helping your creative side come forward, especially if you're a person who normally does left brain, very disciplined things. It's a good way to get out of the left brain and into your right brain and to be able to come up with some creative solutions for things. So this was something I fought when I first learned it. And now it's one of my absolute favorites. And fortunately, I have some places where I can do this, and I have done it indoors as well. So it is something where if you have a place indoors, you're not going to be disturbed. you can, and you can bring your rocks. You can also do this inside. So those are just a couple of suggestions on things you might do creatively. If you're interested in learning more, I'm happy to answer questions, direct you to resources, or any of those things. Thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you so much, Dawn. For audience members, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. And maybe I can just get us started as people are writing out questions or thinking about it. There's so much great stuff, and I have so many thoughts. But I guess just to start with, can you talk a little bit more about the connections between the shamanistic kind of approach to the world and with like Western science? I mean, you mentioned going to the doctor and using intention while you're at the doctor. So clearly, people of shamanistic practice are going to Western medicine. And I think it's easy to think that these ideas would be at tension with each other, maybe. So could you talk a little bit more about that relationship?
So if we take the doctor example and you look at people in Asia where there's a long tradition of traditional medicine and it's still practiced, they will go to an allopathic or Western doctor for something critical like heart attack, broken leg, that type of thing. But for many other problems, they'll seek out traditional medicine. And the reason for that is that with a shamanic approach or a traditional approach, like a shaman, if two people came to a shaman with the exact same symptoms, they won't be prescribed the same medication. In Western medicine, a lot of times doctors are prescribing something to mask your symptoms. Where in a traditional approach, the doctor is going to look beyond what the symptom is to what the root cause is. And I'm going to go to that thing, root cause. So a shaman might journey to find out the source of the illness. And it could be emotional, it could be spiritual, it could be physical. And what is recommended will be based on what they learn. So two people going in with the same symptoms will come out with completely different programs of care, which in this day and age can include a combination of traditional and Western medicine. But it's a difference in that finding the root cause and treating for the root cause. So in intention work, which is related to this, when we do healing for something, so say someone has irritable bowel syndrome, and we're asking for healing for that, and we'll say, and all underlying causes. So we add that, or all root causes. So we'll add that kind of language in there because we're trying to go after not just the symptom or the manifestation, but also what the cause of it is. And it's just a little difference in focus. If you're looking at earth issues, because everything has spirit, you're going to also be asking for, say, permission to work with the tree and work with the wisdom of the tree. So I had a friend was trying to decide whether or not to cut down a tree that was dying. And so I did a journey with the tree and talked to, and worked with the tree spirit to find out what the tree wanted. Well, the tree was in a meditation garden and it served that way. So it knew that it wasn't going to be able to hang on much longer. It was fine with being cut down, but it wanted the wood to be used ceremonially. So the wood was turned into objects that could be used in a ceremonial fashion or during meditation for spiritual items, as opposed to being thrown in the fireplace. Okay. So it was someone who had a lot of connection, acknowledging that they were too close to the situation and were waffling on what does the tree want. Well, the tree was ready to go, but had some requirements. And even I'm a drum maker. I'll be drumming here on campus in 2 weeks for another one book event. And sometimes I've gone to paint a drum and it doesn't work, because the drum doesn't want what I'm trying to put on the drum. And I know a lot of people think I'm crazy, but I recently did a raven drum, which was a commission. And no matter what I did, I could not, normally I will carbon on or stencil on like an outline of the major pieces. No matter what I did, nothing would stick to the drum. I could put the carbon on any other piece of rawhide and it worked fine. Brand new piece would not work. I had to alter it. So I did a journey to ask what it wanted. I had to change the way that the raven faced and changed another component. As soon as I did that, everything worked fine. Drum turned out well, all the paint stuck, everything worked. So it's about acknowledging that we acknowledge that we have to look at things a little differently. So that's kind of a set of examples.
I love it. Thank you. There is a question in the Q&A from Matt. He says, your lecture was so interesting. I love the part of intention and rock grinding. And then a few questions. Where can I get a copy of your PowerPoints?
If you email, I'm happy to send it to you.
And also the recording from this event will be on YouTube, on the library's YouTube channel. So if you wanted to go back and look at it on there, that's available to the public. Also interested in the link of the festival in Germany and also the Shamanic group in Germany.
Okay, so the group in Europe, if you email me at Robel, WROBEL at morainevalley.edu, I can give you a link for the Europe office for the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. It's their European group does that. They don't record it because everything is really, well, I can't say none of the sessions were recorded, but the recordings aren't available. But if you're interested in attending live next year, I can certainly provide a link so that you get that information. Or you can use, you can just Google Foundation for Shamanic Studies. It's shamanism.org. And they have, the event is always listed on their webpage. So a couple of ways to find out.
That's great. Thanks for the question, Matt. And before I forget, I just want to say I do love the Chicago dog example for a whole lot of reasons. First off, because who doesn't like a good Chicago dog? Maybe that'll be my lunch today. But also the library aspect and the research aspect for sure. But one of my interests is also in how our mind operates and how our mind processes information, as I'm sure you know, Don, as we've discussed many topics over the years. But the whole discussions with shamanism in connecting to the unconscious processing of the mind, the neuroscience research is really showing us that consciousness is only a small part of what our brain actually does. And so, that's also why if you engage in a topic and you take a break and just step away from it, the mind keeps processing. And then sometimes you'll have that aha moment on the answer you're seeking when you're not really ready for it. And so I do think that example really fits with what the neuroscientists are telling us. Touch on a thing, try something else, move in a different direction, and the brain will find its way to an answer. So I think that's fantastic. So, and Matt's asking for your email one more time. Can you give us that one more time?
Yeah, I can put it in chat if that helps. It's Robel at Moraine Valley.
Yeah, that would be great.
So it's just Robel at morainevalley.edu.
Perfect.
And happy to connect and get you some resources or links, whatever you need.
And then another question, do people consider the upper world as heaven and the underworld as hell?
Okay, so that depends on your culture. So if you're looking at Europe is predominantly Christian, and so if you look at European shamanism and the roots there, generally the underworld is hell and the upper world is heaven. But if you talk to many Native Americans or First Nations people, because they have a different relationship with the land, often for them heaven is the earth, and it's the opposite of what it is for Europeans. So part of that is going to depend on your perspective, but in shamanic terms, there's really no hell. Our lower world have layers. Working with animals convinced me there's a heaven, but I don't consider heaven synonymous with the upper world. For me, it's a specific place and specific things there. I actually have, for one of my programs, I mapped my upper and lower world. That was one of the things I had to do. So I've got multiple layers mapped, and very specific types of things happen in specific places for me. and that's pretty consistent with most shamans, is that, if you're going to do a particular kind of work, you go to a particular place in your cosmology, in your map.
I love that idea, and it's almost like turning your mental existence into a physical kind of embodiment.
Right.
And I don't know if that's a fair way to put it. I don't mean to
It is. And I
diminish
should,
anything.
I should have brought it, but mine's kind of folds out and it's really big. But I'm a geographer, so I'm used to mapping things. So for me, that was like a really fascinating project. And then when we were comparing them, and the way people illustrated them, there were a lot of similarities between the 24 people in my group. We had a lot of similarities in how we mapped things, but they weren't identical. We had a lot of similarities in terms of where things happened, but how the place looked might be different.
That's great.
The layer might be the same. So it's really interesting.
It's fascinating. Question from Ryan in the chat. He asked about when to ask permission from a living thing, but a nonverbal thing like a tree. And maybe I'd ask, so there's something like a tree, but also then what about like an animal, like you had mentioned, working with the dogs? Tell us a little bit more about that permission process and how that unfolds.
So if I'm going to work with an animal and I have an appointment ahead of time, I do a lot of work from photos. I do a lot of work in Zoom because, even before the pandemic, I was working in Zoom because I have clients all over the world. I work with 2 zoos. And so if I'm going to work with the animal, generally, first you have to have, if they're owned by somebody, I get permission from the owner. But then I check in with the animal a couple minutes ahead of time and I introduce myself and I ask for permission to work with them. And occasionally I have an animal, usually it's one that has behavior issues and doesn't want to change them, where it's going to fight the work and I just, I can't do it, or I need to send them to someone else. Maybe there's someone else that they can communicate with, but you still ask permission. When you're working with plants, it's more of a feel. And when I teach plant medicine, like some shamanic practitioners teach divination using plants, I teach more using plants as part of healing work. And it's more of a sense that the plant is willing to work with you. And I said it's more of a sense that you get, and that's just from practice. And could I do it easily at the beginning? No, but now I can. But I've been doing it I've probably been doing it my entire life. I was sort of a Pied Piper with all of the odd animals when I was a child. And, I'd touch into this work and then step away from it because everybody thought I was too weird. And then step back in. And 20 years ago, I just jumped in totally. And I've had some amazing experiences.
That's great. It's like the natural inclination, finding your place. A question from Jose. Can you explain what the process was like your first time healing water, and what did you do to heal it?
At this point, I don't remember exactly what we did, except that we did a journey, and the best I can remember it is we did a journey where we went to a compassionate helping spirit. And we asked that spirit to heal the body of water the water from the body of water we chosen to work with, and to heal us so that we could take that back as medicine to help heal the rest of the water. And that's all I really remember of that particular journey, because that was 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago. And I've read accounts of that where people have actually done that with toxic substances added to the water and had the guts to drink it afterward, because they tested it, it was pH neutral, it cleared up. And I didn't have that confidence, but I've read a lot of, read and seen some accounts of that. And similar processes have been used in Japan a lot, but you could look at it as doing a prayer or healing, asking for healing for the water. And because I didn't know how to do it yet at that time, I was new to the work, I went to a compassionate helping spirit to ask them to heal the water. And maybe that, that's how it works. You're looking for that divine help in healing what you're working on.
There's a question from Magali. I'm probably really butchering her name, so sorry about that, or his name. The rock grinding, is it the feeling relaxing or being relaxing?
Actually, it is for me relaxing. And for years, I had a friend who does like the yoga retreats and things, and Buddhist retreats where literally you don't talk for 7 days and you just sit there and breathe and you eat very little. I can't do that. That's not me. But for me, the rock grinding is really relaxing. My favorite place to do that is actually on our property in northern Wisconsin, but I do it on my home property as well. And I've done it indoors in the winter because I don't tolerate the cold enough to sit outside in the snow for time. But I find it really relaxing, and I tend to have monkey mind. And it's one of the few practices I found that if I'm really, like if my head's really mentally congested with stuff going on, even a short stretch, like 20 minutes of rock grinding, I find can help me clear that, because if I only focus on the physical activity, it allows my head to clear up.
Can see. And it's probably good to say if people are interested and I'm not a expert in any of this area, but I do know just from some experiences and talking to people when it comes to like meditation and building these practices, it does take time, right? Like this isn't something that you're going to sit
Right.
down and just do for 3 hours. Like we should have
No,
reasonable expectations, right?
I had been doing this type of work for maybe 13 or 14 years when I first did the rock grinding. So I'd been doing it for a while. But the rock grinding, I have taught to people who are pretty new to the practice, but I've taught it from a more meditative standpoint, that for people who can't do, like I can't do a breathing meditation. I cannot sit there and hold focus. My head is still full of monkey mind. But if I do the rock grinding, I can get out of my head. So I've taught it to people as a way to get out of their head, because you can do it for shorter periods of time to help just clear all that, we call it monkey mind, all that stuff. And that is something I think someone new to meditation could do if they have a hard time with more traditional meditation.
Well, this is probably a good point to almost wrap up. The one thing I wanted to ask before we're done is about the upcoming drum circle event that people that our audience may be interested in joining. Could you tell us a little bit about what that will be?
Okay, so that all of us have at least two rhythms, and I'll let you think about what those might be, but we all have at least two rhythms. But there are some rhythms that are found in multiple cultures that are used for healing, and we're going to talk about sounds or rhythms that are for each of the elements: air, water, fire, and earth. And we're going to do a healing rhythm to heal the earth here on campus, right locally. And so I have cases full of all kinds of drums and percussion instruments and found sound things. So I have plenty of instruments. We'll have chairs out there for people. And we're going to be, if the weather is good, which is my intention, we'll be between S and G out in that area. And if the weather's bad, we're going to be in Maureen Room 1 in the M building. And we're going to drum for some individual healing and to heal the earth here on campus.
And that will be April 19th at 1 p.m., correct?
At 1 p.m. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. So I hope everyone can join us then. That it'll be kind of putting the conversation into practice. So that's very exciting. Well, let me again, Dawn, just say thank you. This is really enlightening and fun, and I think challenging in some ways as well. So a really nice talk. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience. And this will be on YouTube hopefully later today or tomorrow. Okay. And we will stop there. Thank you.